watching or listening to Strangers in Space, and for the next half an hour, 20 minutes, 40 minutes, we've got a little more news to talk about, so you don't have to. Hi, I'm JR.
Hi, I'm John.
So yeah, we recorded last night, and at the end of it, you did say there was going to be some more news coming today, and it wasn't sort of like, a great big spasm of huge amounts of news or anything. But we did, in our WhatsApp group, several of us chipped in. But between the pair of us, you and I seem to have the most to say about what the consequence, I guess, of the news was. And actually, as it turned out, everybody else was busy this evening. And you and I said, well, why not? Let's just do it anyway for 20 or 30 minutes. And so we will be talking about the fact that they've said when the series starts and the manner in which it will start in a couple of minutes. But before we do that, actually, there was some other news insofar as Radio Times clickbaited it out into the world earlier in the week, which we haven't really commented on because I think we kind of thought it was old hat and everybody kind of knew already, but about Steven Moffat. So we might as well have a couple of minutes. Steven Moffat. It's not a surprise that he's writing for Russell T Davies.
Oh, not at all.
That's been, people have known about that for at least a year, I think. It's been quite strong. Nobody's known for 100% sure, but it's been pretty strongly predicted for at least a year, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, if you've been watching the rumours around it, it's been one of the strongest ones right from the start.
Yeah.
And obviously it's been quite clear that Steve Moffat hasn't lied about it, but he's been very careful in his wording about things.
He did what he did when people said to him, is it true that you have to use the Daleks every year? And he said, why would there need to be a contract that says I have to use the Daleks every year? Of course we want to use the Daleks every year. But he didn't say no. But in this instant, I think the interesting thing is not so much the fact that Steven Moffat's writing for it, but what he's going to write. And we did kind of allude to this in passing when we recorded last night, because Matt was here, and Matt's got this theory, speculation, whatever, dream maybe, about what he thinks it might be. But actually, I think the wording of what was released is quite interesting. So what the Radio Times found, presumably because somebody had posted it on Gallifrey Base, was a listing on somebody's producer credits. I'm not going to name the person it was because I don't think it's fair, because that seems to be pointing the finger of guilt at somebody. But this producer had listed, or somebody on her behalf had listed on her page, I don't think it was IMDb, I think it was somewhere else, that she was producing, quote, the Series 15 Christmas special, unquote. And listed next to that was director Alex Pillai, which I think is interesting anyway, because he's got quite an interesting, he's been around in the industry for 30 years and he's got quite a long, interesting list of credits. I think he's Indian or somewhere from that neck of the woods, I think. Maybe Chinese, I'm not sure. But he's certainly of that persuasion. But the really interesting thing was, of course, that Steven Moffat is listed as the writer for Series 15 Christmas special.
And also interesting because Russell did say that he was writing it in one of his production notes column a couple of years back.
Well, he said he was
18
writing
months.
He said he was writing the 2024 Christmas special. And he talked very specifically about the special that goes between Series 1 and Series 2. He said, I'm working on the next Christmas special already. Well, this is what I've got to ask you. Do we know if Ncuti Gatwa's second Christmas special was recorded while they were making Series 1 or while they were making Series 2?
I think it's at the end of Series 1, because Nicola Coughlan is the guest star and she was seen filming, and that was last year.
Exactly. And so this is what I'm throwing out into the world. I think that the Christmas special that comes next, the 2024 Christmas special, is the second Series 14 Christmas special. I think the Series 15 Christmas special is the one that comes after Ncuti Gatwa's second series. For after all, why would this news be appearing now if we're talking about a Christmas special that was made, that was produced, that should have ended up on this person's CV several months, if not a year ago?
I mean, if it's effects heavy, then maybe that's why they're getting it done early, so they got the maximum prep work on it.
No, John. The point I'm making is, if the 2024 Christmas special has been in the can for months, and this news has just appeared now on somebody's CV.
Oh yeah.
What I'm saying is, this is not for the special that was in the can 6 months ago.
Yes,
this is for a special that's about to start shooting now.
It's back the 2025 Christmas special is what you're saying here.
Exactly. I'm saying
absolutely.
All the evidence to me points to the Christmas special that comes after Ncuti Gatwa's second series. I think that's nailed on from what we've seen.
Pretty much.
Everybody, I've not seen anybody speculate that it might possibly be the 2025 one. Everybody is saying, 2024, because the Radio Times article, the clickbait, I didn't read it, but the clickbait itself said Christmas 2024, didn't it? Like as if the person who wrote that was completely incapable of taking a series of dots and adding them up. Everybody who read the clickbait title was equally as incapable of saying, hang on, you've got fewer dots there than you thought you had.
They haven't got a big source of information in the production office, have they? It's not like I can't remember what these, but the Daily Mirror journalist. Yes, Nicola Methven. Thank you. If it was her, then you're looking okay, maybe she's not 100% on track record, but I'd say
added 2 and 2 together here and come up with the number 7, haven't they? Basically,
absolutely. And I think it would make more sense to be next year because we know we don't know, but it's heavily rumored that Steven Moffat has written for Ncuti's first season as well.
Exactly. It would be very odd for Steven Moffat to have 2 episodes within 7 or 8 months or whatever, and for them to have been filmed like 18 months apart. That would be quite odd. So if that rumor about Steven Moffat having written episode 4 or 5 or 3, actually, I think it's
2, is it? I think there's a rumor it's 2 episodes he's written.
Oh really? But either way, it's not likely to be 1 episode or 2 episodes and it's not like Steven Moffat's doing as much work as Russell T Davies on this, presumably.
No, I mean, is he wrapped up with Hartswood work at the minute? I would have thought. Maybe on the production side.
I don't know quite what is going on. There's 2 series in development at the moment. I think one's in production and the other one's being written. I'm not sure exactly, but I think there are. Yeah.
And obviously, he had the Unfriend when he was writing that as well last year.
Sure.
The year before.
Just had its last performance this week, apparently.
It has, yes.
Now, Matt's speculation that he alluded to last night, which I'll now spell out, I guess, for the sake of having it on this episode, was that Russell. And so this kind of goes back to something I speculated earlier. And I said I think Russell T Davies would not do like 4 or 5 years like last time, but would do 1 or 2 years and then would move upstairs to become an executive producer running things, but would leave the sort of day-to-day show running on Doctor Who, the majority of the episode writing, to a sort of follow-up showrunner or team of showrunners or succession of showrunners who he would oversee, but who would have a certain amount of autonomy beneath him. And Matt's speculation was Russell T Davies does 2 series, Steven Moffat does a Christmas special to bridge between the gaps, which would feature Matt Smith, and then a new showrunner would come in with a 3rd series, probably Kate Herron and Bryony Redman, right? Because they're the only writers so far to have been announced.
The only ones we know, and they've got showrunning experience.
And yes, and that actually goes back to something else that was predicted on this podcast too, which was Matt saying Kate Herron should be the next showrunner way back when she did the first series of Loki. Point being, we have also heard tell that Ncuti Gatwa is doing 2 years and then moving on. Now, that's been speculated for a while. That's been speculated for a while, but we've heard kind of industry gossip which suggests that actually it's basically already sort of happened, that his notice, I guess, is handed in and that he's moving on at the end of the year. And presumably, because of that, you would think there's casting around for a replacement. And I guess Well, I was just going to say, I guess the sense of it is that if it would make more sense for him to leave at the end of a series, it would make more sense for another Doctor to debut at the start of a series. And it kind of makes sense in that context to have a Christmas special that is a bit like the Tennant specials that we had last year, or something of that ilk, where you get a guest star of some kind instead to do a Doctor Who. So Matt thinks Matt Smith. I think that's certainly a possibility. Or else you do a John Hurt style thing, where you actually do an episode of Doctor Who that doesn't necessarily revolve around a familiar Doctor, but could instead revolve around something else.
But you also have the David Tennant Doctor there. So,
you do.
It's just sitting there.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And after all, that would make complete sense too, in a way, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I was just thinking, Russell does tend to come back to stuff he's parked later on, even if doesn't know what he's going to do with it at the time. So
he does have a habit of doing that. Although this, of course, is Steven Moffat. And the one thing that Russell T Davies hasn't done is come back to his parked Doctor, which was the David Tennant that he parked in Journey's End. So, but it's not beyond precedent. He does tend to leave a lot of things out there and then picks up the threads that he wants to. For example, You Are Not Alone coming from the face of Bo, which was never the original intention, but was something that Russell T Davies decided to do as they were making the series, right?
Oh, yeah, and Binary, the binary lines.
Yeah, absolutely. Right, that's that. I think that's our prediction, is that it's Moffat's actually writing the 2025 Christmas special,
absolutely,
not this year's. Shall we get to the main announcement then?
Let's do it, because this is the fun bit.
Well, they've said. Well, I didn't think this was the fun. See, when I first saw this, Matt posted it in our thread. He was the first one to see it, and he posted it in our WhatsApp thread. The news being, of course, that they've announced the broadcast date for Ncuti Gatwa's first series, which will start on May the 11th or 10th, depending how you look at it.
On your time zone.
Yeah, depending on your time zone or whatever. Being that it's going to be broadcast on the Saturday evening, being the Eurovision Saturday evening, but it's going to debut on iPlayer at midnight of the Friday night, the day before. I mean, technically, I suppose it's the morning of Saturday, but to all intents and purposes, it's Friday night. So that then Disney can have it at 7 p.m. Eastern time on the Friday. So that would still be the 10th as far as America's concerned, which is a good time for it to debut in America, I guess. 7 p.m. is a nice time for them to catch their Doctor Who. In Britain, primarily Doctor Who and BBC material is still watched way more on broadcast or after broadcast than before broadcast. Yep. But the BBC have been trialing putting stuff out before broadcast for a number of years now.
It's been a long time, isn't it?
Yeah, they even did it. They even trialed it on DVD with Gavin and Stacey way back when, and that was more than 10 years ago, I think. Do you remember Gavin and Stacey? The final series, the BBC put the DVD out before the broadcast.
Was that the 2019 one? Oh no, that was just a Christmas special, wasn't it?
No. The last series. This was way before.
I am the sole person in South Wales who didn't watch Gavin and Stacey because of my James Corden allergy.
Okay, sure. It was, I can't remember. It was something like 2008, I think. It was.
Yeah, it's a long time. Ago. Yeah.
Anyway, they trialed it then. They put the DVD out first because they knew that the number of people who buy these things, who buy into this experience, is dwarfed by the number of people who actually still do it the conventional way. Because DVD sales are, a couple of 100,000 is not going to break the bank when you're talking about 5 or 6 million viewers. And so it is with Doctor Who. The iPlayer numbers are massive now, but they're still dwarfed by broadcast and post-broadcast. Immediate post-broadcast I'm talking about. So for me, when I saw the news, it was like, oh, that's a brilliant idea, because
it's your Friday night theory and everyone else's theory rolled into one, isn't it?
Basically, that's not why I think it's a good idea. I think it's a good idea because it means that Doctor Who is on the iPlayer for 48 hours across the weekend rather than 24. And so I think, because I've said this, and I don't want to repeat it ad nauseum like I have before, but just briefly, I've always said, or I've said for quite some time now, most catch-up is done at weekends. Most competition for catch-up happens at weekends. So people choosing between, do they catch up something they wanted to watch on Netflix, or Disney Plus, or iPlayer, or 4Play, or ITVX, or whatever. If you can bung Doctor Who on Friday night, across the series as well, for fans, that makes an exciting thing, an event. Like when the TV movie came out on VHS, I suppose it was, wasn't it? Yeah.
96.
And people queued at midnight to get their copies of the TV movie on VHS, right? This is essentially the sort of streaming equivalent of that. It means that the episode is sitting there for the entire weekend for people to watch at their own leisure. I mean, can you imagine the families will get up on Saturday morning and say, shall we do Doctor Who?
Well, I've worked it out. I'm out on that Saturday evening, so it's perfect for me. So either I watch it before I go to bed or I watch it when I get up. I'm fine.
And it's great for podcasters, of course.
Absolutely.
Because we can then record our podcast as and when we want on the Saturday. And of course, although a lot of people will access it, I don't think it bites massively into the broadcast audience, because the live broadcast audience tends to be that kind of audience that is casual enough that they'll watch Doctor Who because it's there, but wouldn't necessarily seek it out if it wasn't, or might come to it afterwards if there was some buzz. But now I want to come back to what you said and what I have read elsewhere. And what I read elsewhere suggested that it was both episodes, because I said, when I first heard, I said, oh, I wonder if that means one will be broadcast on the first Saturday and one will be broadcast the Saturday after, and then you get into a normal cycle. But no, what I read was that both episodes will be broadcast on that first Saturday, from what I can make out. But the point being, well, this was what you said, so for you to say.
Oh, absolutely. We know the second episode is the Beatles episode. It's the musical one, as far as we know. So that makes absolutely perfect sense to link into Eurovision as big event TV. So you've got, as someone would say, it's it's gay heaven that night. Was it someone put Who Revision?
Yeah, well, absolutely. 2 episodes, movie length Doctor Who, followed by more than movie length Eurovision. It's everybody parks their bums on seats at 6:30 in the evening and makes an evening of it, right?
Absolutely, and Eurovision is still a big live TV event.
Absolutely.
So you get Doctor Who hooking onto that. It's only good for Doctor Who.
Do you remember when Russell T Davies was making Camp Doctor Who, and they used to park it for a week when Eurovision was up?
Oh God, yes. Why did you do that? You're not maximising your audience there, guys.
And the other thing is, as well, this kind of then makes up for the fact that Russell T Davies wanted, back in 2005, for Rose and the End of the World to go out on the same evening. And apparently that was the plan. And I guess it was the BBC that nixed it in the end. Maybe the BBC got cold feet about how big Doctor Who might possibly be. And maybe they regretted it afterwards. And I think Russell T Davies, I think a slight bit of the motivation here is to kind of make up for that as well, I think.
Absolutely. And that, you can tell from the narrative, that's Rose and the End of the World is essentially a 2-part episode.
Yeah, insofar as it's about her discovery of what the capabilities are. And I guess what then happens on Eurovision night, if you get the Space Babies one and the Beatles one as well,
Devil's Chord,
is that you're getting outer space and history. But it's recent enough history that people don't necessarily remember it, but it is sort of within the sort of living lifetime of parents and grandparents, and it's within the cultural memory, and so it partly becomes an event there. Let's go to outer space, let's have a camp adventure with Space Babies for 45 minutes, and then let's go and find out what the Beatles were up to before we watch Eurovision. Works perfectly.
It's very interesting because I think for fairly obvious reasons, the old series didn't go back into recent history. But obviously there's that big war-shaped thing in the middle there, so it was never going to touch that. Well, that was in essentially living memory, so it doesn't touch it till I think Fenric is the first story off the top of my head, somewhere around there.
Well, the original run was basically about educational history. This
Mostly
is about
the first the monochrome years, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. This isn't about educational history. This is about cultural history. This is about cultural memories. It's about a band that everybody knows, and actually that have just had their first #1 for God knows how many years. It did get to #1, didn't it? Their single.
I did. I remember. Yes.
Christmas. Yeah. So they've had their first #1 for God knows how many years in the past few months. I don't know if Russell T Davies even knew that when he decided to do an episode with the Beatles in. Now, of course, the thing is, they're advertising it on the back of the Beatles being in it. We don't know whether the Beatles are going to be in for any more than one scene. It could be that it's a story about the Beatles. It could be that it's a story about something else that they're in. Also, the rumours seem to have sort of come together around this, as you kind of alluded to just now, that it's the musical episode, which makes sense of Russell T Davies doing a very short song in the Christmas special to kind of whet the appetite.
It seeds it, doesn't it?
Yeah. But having said that, that's kind of just what people have assumed. I don't think anybody knows that it's a musical episode at all.
No, not 100%.
No, but there's a lot of, all the circumstantial evidence points to the fact that it would be, but I don't know.
The rumours that are out there point to it being the musical episode, but no one's 100% sure at all.
No, I'm not even entirely sure if everybody knows that Jinx Monsoon is that episode either, or whether that's an assumption too. I mean, it's a sensible assumption.
Yeah.
The costume suggests musical. The costume suggests this would be an episode with bands and music and stuff like that in, because there's musical notes on the collar, whatever it is. And of course, Jinx Monsoon is a singer. So if you're going to do a musical episode, that's the perfect person to get in and do that job, right?
Yes.
But again, she could be in a different episode. All of this could be coincidence. So we don't really quite know. But I mean, like I say, circumstantial evidence. If you're going to have the Beatles, if you're going to have Jinx Monsoon, if you're going to have something that's on just before Eurovision, it makes sense to bring all those elements together.
Totally. I don't think it can be quite planned with that precision from that far out.
I don't know. I was just going to take us down the line of conversation.
I wouldn't be surprised if it was.
Yeah. I mean, you look at other things. You look at series 5.
Dark Water Death in Heaven with the
Remembrance
Day stuff. Yeah. And series 5 with the transmission dates.
That's absolutely no. I think, as I recall, there's a way that they could have fudged the transmission dates in series 5 if it had gone another way, but it started on the Easter weekend and it finished exactly 12 weeks later, which is exactly what you'd expect. So they knew what date they were aiming for. As you say, series 9 finishes on Remembrance weekend, and there's a load of stuff in that episode that ties in absolutely with that idea. So that one, despite the fact that it's coming in the autumn, looks like that was absolutely set up too. And we had said when we saw at Christmas time that Doctor Who was coming in May, that was not what we were expecting, and we wondered why, because everybody was expecting an Easter broadcast. And then the thing was, that must be Disney who've pushed it back. Russell T Davies must be, or the BBC must be broadcasting it then at Disney's behest. I don't think so. I think Russell T Davies, I think he's got half his mind on what he's doing now, but half is not. He's got half a mind as well on the things that happened in RTD1 and how you can use those things differently in RTD2. And so missing the double episode in 2005, skipping Eurovision Saturdays during the sort of years that immediately followed, I wonder if he looked at that and he looked at the way he's doing Doctor Who now, because way back then he was accused of being too gay, and of course he never was. It wasn't that gay. And although I mentioned in passing how camp it was a few minutes ago, it wasn't actually that camp either, not compared to what you might necessarily expect. Church on Ruby Road and the specials and the amount of sort of representation that we're seeing and the casting of people like Jinx Monsoon is giving the impression that Doctor Who now is going to lean more in that direction. If Russell T Davies had that intention going in, what better way for him to broadcast that intention by starting on Eurovision weekend? rather than avoiding it. So I think he asked for that, and I think this was his plan all along, regardless of what he might say about, oh, we'd have loved to start at Christmas, but we couldn't, so we did it in May instead.
I wouldn't be surprised in the slightest, because Russell T Davies does have a particular genius for popular culture. He knows what sells. He knows what works well hooked together, for instance. So the original series Doctor Who is written for that big Saturday night entertainment audience. It's not heavy drama. It's popular drama that you can stick between a couple of quiz shows, for instance,
or it behaves strictly. It was coming at the time of Pop Idol, and I've said this many times, and I'll repeat it again just for the sake of it. In Pop Idol, everybody came each week, much like they do with Strictly now, and there's a theme, and they have to sort of do something that achieves the theme, right? That's exactly what Rose is going through in that series with Christopher Eccleston.
There's a really good. There's a good book on there with a chapter on exactly that. I don't know who wrote it, But,
well, some guy had clearly been listening to my podcast just a little bit too closely.
Not guilty, Your Honour, honest. It's the journey thing. Rose is on that journey. It's a dramatic structure. Russell talks about it in The Writer's Tale. He says that whole structure. It's quite deliberate. So
those programs, the sort of pop idols, have just peaked. They've passed their peak now, haven't they?
Oh, they're what 5-6 years since the X Factor's gone. Strictly still going. Because
it's slightly different, but
it's the nature of it. It's not the competitive. The competitive ones have kind of fallen away. Although I know obviously they've tried to redo Big Brother. Love Island has its audience.
Sure, but the big Saturday night ones were the sort of Pop Idol ones. Britain's Got Talent. I think Britain's Got Talent still goes, doesn't it?
I think it goes more midweek, doesn't it?
I think it's spread across.
Spread across the week. Yes,
I think they do it across like 2 or 3 weeks.
It's like I'm a Celebrity. It's across.
But now you've got the Masked Singer instead, and so the Masked Singer and Strictly is very different from the X Factor and Strictly.
Yeah, there's no journey to the Masked Singer at all.
No. So but it is a big camp fest on a Saturday night, right?
Oh, totally.
So what Russell T Davies is doing now, instead of doing the journey thing that he did with Rose, is doing, this is what it looks like. It looks like he's leaning into the camper aspect of it. And of course, Doctor Who will be, by and large, much the same as it's always been. And Russell T Davies' Doctor Who will be, by and large, much the same as Russell T Davies' Doctor Who was the first time. But there would just be a slight emphasis in a different direction. And we saw that in The Church on Ruby Road.
Absolutely. And I think the other thing you say is that, I know it's not the huge absolute mainstream, but Drag Race is, again, it has an audience of it. It's big in America. Yeah. So that, I think, is an obvious factor. And obviously Jigs Monsoon being in it is something that feeds into that.
For sure. Right, I guess there's one more question to speculate on before we go, and that is, they're doing this. They've announced this for the first 2 episodes and the first broadcast weekend. There are 2 ways this can go. It could be that this is a promotional stunt for the start of the series of Doctor Who, and then it'll go back to Doctor Who broadcast at 7 p.m. or whatever time on a Saturday evening, and it's released on iPlayer at the same time, and Disney do day and date by releasing it at, I don't know, midnight on a Saturday or whatever it is, which would be day and date for them, midnight on a Friday, whatever. Or the other alternative is they continue with this. They release the episodes at midnight on the Friday night, and in America they have them at 7 p.m. Eastern time on Disney Plus. That to me seems by far the most likely. But I'm just saying, I'm just putting it out there that the other's a possibility that this is a launch thing rather than a sort of permanent thing.
I think the dates are very much dictated. I think the time of release is going to be dictated by Disney, because that is showing you the audience Doctor Who wants to capture with this new series. It wants to be big. It wants to get an even bigger American audience than there is already. So I very much suspect that we're going to see this midnight thing continue on through the series. And I know that's going to annoy British people because it is essentially saying, or certain fans.
Yeah, I think the number of people that this is going to annoy is going to be minuscule. I think most fans, for most fans, you're getting it like, what is it, 19 hours early. So instead of 7 p.m. on a Saturday, there's 19 fewer hours to wait for your episode.
And the other thing is, again, as with what they did with the specials, it kills piracy as much as you can. Assuming you can afford Disney Plus, it's there's no need to look anywhere else for your Doctor Who. It's there, it's up, it's fine.
Yeah.
So I think this will be essentially this Disney having put the money in, they will be favoured for that release slot.
Yeah. Or else, of course, the executives at Disney and the executives at Bad Wolf and Russell T Davies are all fans of this podcast and have heard me telling them to do this for the last 2.5 years, and I've just decided finally to.
The power behind the throne is finally revealed.
On that note, then, we'll probably be back tomorrow night for another burst of news. But until that happens, I was JR.
And I was John.
And we will speak again soon.